In this video, I went to Road and Race to get my Titan LSD rebuilt with sintered plates. Ollie was very kind and agreed to answer a lot of questions, which I'm sure you will find very interesting. This is a long but very informative video, so make sure that you've got a cup of tea with you because, well, it's a good one. I'll also add some time codes for certain questions, so you can check that out in the timeline. Hello and welcome back to another video, and today we're with Ollie from Road and Race, and thank you for letting me come down and have a chat with you. Thank you very much, that's very much appreciated. And so we're here at Road and Race today because the diff in Little Fern is, well, it did break, it was an LSD, and then it got transferred to an open diff, and now we're here today to get the LSD rebuilt, and Ollie's going to do that for me, so thank you. And hopefully it'll be a lot better to drive. We're definitely on track and hopefully get well, some better times, hopefully, well, that's the plan. So thank you for letting me come down today and let me watch Ollie. Thank you very much. And could you just tell me a little bit about yourself in Road and Race?
Yeah, so obviously I work at Road and Race. I mean, we've been going for around 30 years, I think, from memory. Phil's been here for 30 years. He started this back in the 90s after sort of doing his own work. Also, we've been a caterham specialist for years, at least 25 years. Yep. That all stemmed from Phil's brother racing caterhams and having involvement with the factory and so on, and numerous sort of garages, race teams, and private enthusiasts. Yep. Like yourself, all with their various issues and upgrades and other bits they need. Yeah. And we've sort of, I'd say we're one of the global sort of experts in the gearboxes and diffs.
Yeah.
For the caterhams. Yeah,
definitely. When it comes to, like, I obviously did a bit of research before coming to you guys, and on like Black Chat, for instance, and on like the Facebook forums and stuff like that. It's, yeah, you definitely seem to be the right people to go to, and definitely the right people to get advice from. So that's, yeah, the main reason for coming down.
Yeah.
So how long have you been rebuilding diffs and gearboxes yourself?
I've been here for around 12 years, I think now. I struggle to remember sometimes. It feels like, some days it feels like a lot longer. Yeah, I've been here for around 12 years. I started primarily building diffs, I think, from the start. Yep. And it's kind of what I focus on now. I mainly do sort of differentials and sequentials and sort of more race-orientated stuff.
Okay.
So I say 90% of the diffs that come in here. I don't know why, but it seems to be the way things have fallen. Yeah, so we see all sorts, not just from caterhams, but from like a variety of vehicles. Yep. Sort of a lot of BMWs, also a lot of front wheel drives that require LSDs. Yeah. But yeah, we obviously do an awful lot of caterhams. I'd say probably more than anyone else out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely your name comes up more than anybody else's when anybody says that they need their, diff rebuilding or anything like that. So yeah, definitely very good. And so what I currently have, or that is broken at least, is a Titan LSD, which I know had the carbon plates in. And today we're going to be putting in the sintered plates.
Sintered ones, yeah.
So what's the difference between the sintered and the carbon plates?
It's essentially the material the clutch plates are made out of. So the carbon ones are a carbon fibre weave, which on the face of it sounds fantastic. I believe they're originally designed for F1 use, so they're meant to be replaced after every qualifying session or every race session, certainly every weekend. And the carbon weave they originally put in was put in because it's very smooth, so you didn't have sort of the noise, vibration, harshness that you would do with other LSDs. Unfortunately, it's proven to be sort of, well, not up for the task of road driving. It seems to disintegrate and fall apart over time, which is irritating because initially they start off and they're nice and silent, then before long they sort of, as it falls off, you get sort of the noise of metal on metal plates. Yep. And other LSD issues. And that is the cause of your failure. Yeah. And you're not alone with that, unfortunately. But
And I know that I've seen the internals of mine, because I've literally brought my internals in a bag to you, and I can see that on those plates where there should be carbon, because there's like a tiny little bit left, and hopefully in a minute we'll see what mine currently look like that are broken and not usable, and then compared to a new actual carbon one, and then also the sintered one, so we can see the difference between them. But I'm sure that mine look terrible compared to what they should have looked like, or at least when they were new.
Yeah, I mean, we see them to varying degrees. So sometimes just a light layer of carbons come off and they're quite, you can still very clearly see a carbon weave on them.
Yep.
Other times they're completely back to bare metal, and they just look like a standard metal clutch plate. But you'll notice as well, they are very different in material to the sintered plates. There's a carbon weave being quite black and graphite-like, and the sintered plates being sort of a goldy copperish colour.
Yeah.
And you see it's a very different type of material. And the sintered plates are a lot more durable. Unfortunately, they are more noisy. They do clunk and bang a bit more.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult trade-off between sort of quietness but a failure, or
yeah.
yeah.
But I know for me, I know some owners are quite conscious about the noise possibly of what diffs can make. But for me, I know that you're literally sat on top of it, or it's going to slightly behind you, and that's one of the reasons that I bought my Caterham in the first place. Is that I want to have that rawness feeling. So to me, the actual noise of it doesn't actually bother me particularly. But I know that sometimes when they do make some like noises, that can, people can be worried about that. But that's not always the case that they're actually broken, can it? If they're noisy, some diffs are just a bit noisier than others, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the sintered plates in the Titan are noisy. There's no getting around that. And you do find different people have got different levels of expectations for them.
Yeah.
I think you're always going to suffer if you buy a Caterham thinking it's going to be as quiet, not just with the diff, but just generally, as sort of a car from say BMW or Mercedes or whoever. It's it's just not. It's not the same thing. It's like comparing apples and oranges. It's just it's a race car that you're driving on the road at the end of the day. But in terms of the diff and the sintered plates, yes, they're noisy because they're extremely grippy, and as you turn around a corner, they sort of grip and release. And we've had some people say it feels like the back of the car's going to fall off. It is horrendous to drive.
Yeah.
And they're not used to it. You come from an open diff in a road car.
Yeah.
It's smooth. You don't notice it's there. That is one of the benefits of an open diff.
Yeah.
But the sort of the plated diffs and sintered ones, they are incredibly grippy.
Yeah.
And it's just you can sort of feel them bind and release. Different oils can help that. They can help quieten them down, or at least make that a bit smoother. But I think with any plated diff, at the end of the day, it's a clutch in there. No matter the material, whether it's carbon, sintered, steel on steel like some manufacturers use, molybdenum, which is quite popular again with others. At the end of the day, you're always going to get a bit of a noise because something's got to give. Something is sort of binding and releasing.
Yeah.
It's how, if it can be done smoothly to an extent that you don't notice it as much, then great. But there's always going to be a trade-off one way or another.
Yeah. Cool. Well, just one very quick question before we go in and get the diff even rebuilt. Can you just explain the difference between an open diff and an LSD for me?
Yeah. So I mean, this is quite a loaded question because there's different types of LSD. But let's start with the open diff. It's fairly simple. The principle is torque is always split 50-50 between each wheel, left and right, and each wheel can turn its own independent speed. So for a road car, that's absolutely fantastic. And you think, well, you always want your torque to be split 50-50.
Yep.
You always want your wheels to have grip. And that does work very well to a large extent for most of the use on the road. Fine, especially with cars, more standard cars.
Yep.
Only problem with that is it then becomes limiting. So as you corner, you transfer weight onto the outside wheel. I don't think then. Yeah. You transfer weight onto the outside wheel. Your inside wheel lifts a little bit, so there's less grip there. The 50-50 sort of limitation only applies to the minimum level of grip on one wheel.
Okay.
So if you've got a wheel that's now lifting slightly, or at least slightly unweighted, that, say it had 40% of the grip it does in a straight line, unfortunately, that same amount can only be transferred to the wheel with grip.
Yeah.
So you end up becoming limited by the wheel with sort of the least amount of grip, and that is the biggest issue of an open diff.
Because one thing that I'm looking forward to is that I know, or hopefully, we'll be getting quicker exit speeds out of corners, and when I've done my track days so far, I've only done them in my open diff, so I'm really looking forward to have the LSD back in, go back on track, and then actually see what kind of exit speeds that I can get, because I think that'll be really quite impressive, hopefully, and I'm sure I'll notice the difference straight away.
It will make a massive difference, and you've probably noticed on track, depending on how hard you drive, but you know, if you lift a wheel in a caterham, which is extremely common just down to how they're set up, you lift a rear wheel, you probably found that you're trying to get on the power mid-corner and nothing's happening. You're just lighting up a wheel.
Yeah.
And then eventually, as you're coming out the corner and starting to straighten back up again, both wheels are firmly on the ground, you start to be able to feed in the power again, and you accelerate. And you've probably noticed people with LSDs in front of you, they're putting the power down mid-corner, and they're disappearing off into the horizon, and you're stuck there.
Yeah. Hopefully that will change.
Yeah, that will.
Or I've got no excuses after it goes back in anyway.
Exactly, it's all on you at that point. But if the difference between an LSD and an open diff is quite, I mean, it's in the name. So LSD stands for limited slip differential.
Yep.
So it limits the amount of slip. So it limits the amount of wheel spin. And there's various ways of doing that. There's a few LSD designs, but what we're talking about is a plated one, which have got sort of clutch plates, ramp angles, and a set of output gears and various other components as you dive deep into them. But essentially, the way they work is you've got a set of clutch plates inside the LSD, got a set of ramp blocks, you've got a set of gears. As you put your foot down, the spider gears they ride up these ramps. Which is obviously very hard to describe without showing you the insides of one. But they ride up these ramps. These put pressure on the clutch plates, and as they're putting pressure on them, it increases a sort of load, a load across the axle. That load is what prevents the wheel from spinning. So as it loads up, it is forcing the output gear, which is connected to your wheels, to turn at the exact same speed as the LSD body.
Okay.
So if that is fully loaded, that diff will effectively become locked, like a spool or a welded axle, which is exactly what you want if you've got a wheel in the air. But you don't want it to be locked all the time. You want a level of movement. You want the wheels to turn independently, because you want to be able to turn into corners. You want areas where you're going through high speed corners where you don't necessarily want both wheels to be locked all the time. You want there to be a little bit of movement. Yeah. So that's why it limits the amount of slip. Doesn't lock it completely, and it doesn't allow it to be open like an open diff. Yeah,
because I've actually been in a drift car before, which had a welded diff, and then if you're trying to do like a tight turn without drifting, you can just hear it slipping all the time. So, and obviously you don't want them doing that on the road, because that would not be a good idea. So LSD seems to be the perfect weld for, and the best of both worlds, isn't it? So
it does. I mean, it is the best for sort of vast majority of race cars. Benefit from LSDs. There's very few that don't have any benefit from them. Road cars, there's definitely an argument for certain types to make some road cars a bit safer and a bit more friendly to drive. But it's always a sort of, I mean, we're talking about conventional road cars. With a caterham, it's a lot more clear cut. LSDs are beneficial in 95% of them. There's very few which it wouldn't be that much use. And again, that's probably down to how the driver uses them rather than. I mean, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I would definitely think that there's an argument for them of what one type or another.
Yeah, very good. Okay, well, let's go inside and we'll get the open diff out and get the rebuilt, or you're going to rebuild the LSD and get that put back in, and then we'll come back and do a few more questions if that's okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Cool.
These are the carbon plates which have worn out on your diff, and this is what they should look like when they're new. I mean, there's obviously a massive difference in terms of the amount of material on them, and essentially what's happened is it's the adhesive which adheres the carbon to the actual metal has just rubbed away. It's hard to know why. They never used to do it back when the carbon plates were first made, but for some reason they've at a point they started wearing away. No one really knows why. It's a bit of an odd one.
Yeah.
But
and you can see those are really quite black in comparison, aren't they?
Yeah,
It looks quite a bit thicker as well, which obviously it wearing away.
If you look closer, you can see the sort of the carbon weave on them. You can sort of, don't know if it can pick it up. You can see the sort of the lines of where the carbons adhere to the metal. And yeah, you can see there's obviously a massive difference between this and that essentially.
Worn away.
Yeah. These are the sintered plates which they get replaced with. They're obviously a very different colour. The wear resistance on these is incredible. And we've got them in cars with 400 horsepower that are racing all season round, and we've never had to change plates on them. They very, very rarely go wrong. You know, if something else has gone wrong, that's when they can potentially get a bit of damage, but that's rare. I don't think we've ever had to change a set through just normal wear and tear.
Okay.
They are extremely durable, but they are a bit more noisy because they're a bit more hard wearing. So you tend to get more of a clunking and banging when you turn. But in my opinion, that's kind of worth the durability of these.
And I know some owners, they talk about diff noise quite a bit, but for me, I understand there's diffs literally underneath you, just slightly a bit behind you. You're going to be hearing noises anyway, aren't you? So even the quietest of diffs, you're still going to hear at least some parts of it, surely. Yeah,
I mean, obviously with a caterer, it's you're sitting right on all the components. The sound deadening is an absolute minimum. It's a lot of stuff is solidly mounted, so you get reverberations through the chassis, through the drivetrain. There is noises coming from all over the place. I think the biggest issue, I think not just us, but any sort of deals with caterhams in general, is when people expect them to sound like their brand new BMW. They expect them to be silent and pleasant to drive and nice, in terms of like sitting in traffic and like sort of noise and vibrations and so on. The diffs themselves, they are noisy. The open diffs, because there's nothing in the LSD, they are a lot quieter generally, just because there's no clunking and banging, there's no resistance, there's no plates trying to move. So if you want a sort of more relaxed drive, then an open diff is arguably a bit better for you as a cruiser. There are other LSDs which are a lot more quiet, and you wouldn't notice a difference. But when you start to get onto plated diffs that are sort of spec for racing, you at the end of the day, they are spec for racing. They're designed to get the most out of the car, and unfortunately, that does sometimes come with a bit of a sort of noise penalty. It's very hard to get around that. You can do what you can with certain oils, you can do what you can with certain settings, but at the end of the day, you are slipping a clutch. You're going to feel some sort of feedback through the rear end. It's just unfortunately the nature of plated diffs, and it's not just with caterhams, it's with all makes. But
totally understandable.
Yeah.
So these parts on the left over here then, these are all the apart from the carbon bits, these are all the new bits that are going to be going in the diff or being used to rebuild the LSD, right?
So all these on the left are all the new bits. That obviously isn't going in, that's just there for show. These are the sintered plates which are replacing the worn out carbon ones. These are a new set of bolts to bolt the sort of top cap onto the LSD body. These are the thrust washers, which, they're designed as a wearing part. Which essentially stops the gears as they rotate from wearing out the inside of the casing. As you can see, these have definitely had their day, and are very worn. Yeah. These are solid spacers which replace the frost washer spacers. So these sit underneath here, and there was an early design that had these Bellevue washer, like conical type ones, and they flattened off, and they decided to change that for solid ones, which are a lot more durable. So they never need replacing.
Right.
And then you've got a new set of bolts to hold the crown wheel onto the LSD.
Yep.
Quite self-explanatory. The Bellevue washers, these are also a wearing part. So you can see that's cracked there. What's happened with that is, as the carbon plates have worn, the materials come off. That then gives more and more slack in the actual LSD itself. and as it gets more sort of slack, the both of your washers have to work harder. They eventually can move a little bit, and essentially it is too much for them, and they crack.
Yeah.
Because they're no longer sitting with a fixed amount of load on them, which they should do. They've got no load on them, and they're essentially able to move up and down in the casing a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just a stress crack, essentially.
So when you come to build some of these rebuild some of these Titan diffs, that's quite a common thing to see, seeing the cracks in those?
So we see those in sort of two instances. One is when these carbon plates have done this, almost all that have got no load will have a crack in them. Yeah. What can happen is if people leave them with no load, that crack becomes worse. They end up shattering and essentially acting like a sort of grenade and damaging the inside of the casing. Then that sends shards of metal out into the rest of the diff, and that can cause like really big problems.
Okay.
If they crack like this, like yours has done, there's no real issue. But it's also not one of the things you don't want to leave it. You want to get that sorted. If your diff has got no load on it, you need to get it sorted.
Yeah. Got it out just in time then.
Yes, he definitely did. And the only other instance we see them crack is if they've been neglected with servicing. So on a standard diff, with sort of sintered plates in it, they tend to hold their load a hell of a lot better than anything. But if you neglect servicing on them, then they will sort of wear down. They eventually lose their load. The both of your washers wear, which is as they're designed to do. And it goes down to sort of next to no load. Then you start to get a bit of slack. Then they'll crack, and that's when you see them. That's when you see them go wrong. Okay. But again, it's sort of neglectful servicing. At the end of the day, it's a race component. They do need servicing from time to time. It's just the nature of it. And these are the sort of the steel plates which replace these. Yeah. In all likelihood, there'll be nothing wrong with these. These could be reused, but
yeah, I was going to say they probably the least damaged part.
I mean,
they don't look too bad. Those.
You know, they don't really wear down, but at the same time, we've got them as part of the kit. If you're gonna, no point not replacing them.
Yep.
So they're sort of it's quite self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Now the only things we don't replace are sort of the diff body, because that is still in good condition. Can't really see now because it's all covered in oil, but it is still in good condition. The ramp blocks, again, unless there's a particular issue with them, which there almost never is, they don't need replacing. The gears, again, they're pretty durable and hardy. We don't really see issues with these, so they never need replacing. So it's essentially the clutches and so on that go wrong. That's the clutches and all those wear components that go wrong. The kind of the expensive bits don't, luckily.
Yeah, that sounds good then.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, we'll get it rebuilt and then hopefully get put in the casing. I didn't want to show exactly what happens in the rebuild. There are kits that you can buy, but after seeing what's involved, I'm glad that I brought my diff here to be rebuilt. Also, having my diff rebuilt here, it was actually cheaper than buying just the rebuild kit itself from Caterham, so money well spent, I think. Here is part of the diff rebuilt and some more clips. There was one part that had been previously modified to put the open diff back into the case. Ollie said, no problem, and came back with a load of the same part, which, well, I'll show them here. It definitely looked like there was a lot of skill and experience that comes into rebuilding these diffs with the correct tolerances. And also by having so many parts on hand, it obviously makes this a lot easier to do. Now let's ask Ollie some more questions. Okay, well, thanks for letting me ask a few more questions, because I'm sure lots of the viewers will be interested in them. And obviously, thank you for letting me watch you kind of rebuild my diff, because I don't think that's probably normal. I guess I'd probably normally go off and get a coffee or something like that while you do it.
Yeah, I mean, we do see both. I mean, a lot of people, because we often get coffee, but you know, you're not the first that's wanted to hang around and take some photos. That's for sure.
No, thank you. I found it really, really interesting as well. So no, thank you very much. And I was just wondering, like, how many diffs can you actually rebuild in a day? I suppose that probably depends a bit on what the diffs are and potentially what the problems are, but just an idea of how many you could do in a day.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the main issue is a semi-loaded question, because it depends on how many people walk through the door or ring me and disturb me. Yeah. And you know, various other sort of things, and how exactly what rebuild we're doing. But I mean, I could probably do 4 in a day, and I have done before with minimal disturbances. That's if I'm going, quite quick, get my head down. I'm not having to worry about anything else.
Yeah.
But it does depend, because each one should take around sort of 2 or so hours.
Okay.
But occasionally they can take a bit longer if you have ones that for some reason aren't setting up as nicely as they should do.
Yeah.
There is, as with anything, there is a time frame that you can't account for. But yeah, most should take around 2 hours.
Yeah, brilliant. And then obviously there's no oil in the diff at the moment. Have you got any kind of recommendations, or what type of oil should I put in it, and also how much should I put in when it's in situ? Because I'll have to put it in situ first when I take out the drain, or the refill plug, because there isn't a drain plug, no. and then put the oil in that way. So how much do I need, and what type do I need?
So the key here, we get asked this a lot. The most important thing with the oil you use, it has to be a GL5 grade.
Okay.
That is like non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever you do, you must use a GL5 grade.
Yeah.
You shouldn't. There's oils graded in different ways for gearboxes and for differentials.
Yeah.
GL4 is predominantly for gearboxes. GL5 is for diffs.
Yep.
They have different levels of additives in them to do with extreme pressure.
Okay.
And essentially, if you put a GL4 oil in a diff, you'll end up burning out the crown and pinion, which is not what you want.
Nope.
So it's what I always have to stress to people: is like GL5 only. If you find a bottle of oil, it says GL4/GL5, just throw it away. Don't use it.
Okay.
Use a GL5 only. That's the best grade to use. And then the viscosity, that should be, because these are obviously built by BMW, that should be a 75/90.
Okay.
An 80/90 will be fine, as would a straight 90.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter too much because it's only the 75 or the 80 is only a sort of cold weight. So as soon as it warms up, which they do in a caterham pretty quickly,
yeah,
that will get to its working temperature very rapidly. So it makes no difference.
Okay.
So yeah, in short, should be a 75/90, an 80/90, or a straight 90, GL5, and if you've got a limited slip differential like yours,
yeah,
should be an LSD oil as well.
Okay.
Some, even more confusingly, some LSDs, not the one you have, shouldn't be used with LSD oil, but
right.
there's for instance, like Quaif and Wave Track and other like Torsen and helical type differentials, they don't require LSD oils, actually make them work less effectively.
Okay.
Bizarrely, but but that's a different topic for another day.
Yeah. So the most common I would think in caterhams would be mine, which is a Titan one.
Yeah.
And also probably a Tracsport diff. So would they be the same type of oil that you'd put in?
Yeah. So the same type of oil. So that would be a 75/90, 80/90, or a straight 90 LSD oil. That is the best thing to use for those. And obviously, as I said earlier, GL5.
Yeah. And how much do I put in?
0.8 litres.
Okay.
I know some of the manuals will say different things, but 0.8 litres is the correct amount.
Okay.
If you put more in, it's not going to do much damage. It might just leak out the seals or come out the breather.
Right.
But I wouldn't worry too much if you overfill it slightly. But
be more of a worry if you put not enough in.
Exactly. They'll probably survive a little bit under, but
yeah,
if you put 0.8 in, easy to do.
Yep. Everyone's a winner.
Exactly.
What's the worst diff that you've ever seen? And maybe I might be able to do a quick film of one.
I mean, we've seen a few that have grenaded badly. Usually they go straight into scrap.
Okay.
But I'm sure I've got some bad ones lying around somewhere.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is if people leave them and just ignore that noise, ignore that,
yeah,
ignore the warning signs. What tends to happen is the Bellevue washers eventually they crack slightly.
Yeah.
As we've seen with yours. Then they shatter if they've been left cracked for too long.
Yep.
And as they shatter, they basically form small bits of metal, which eventually start going out various exits from the diff.
Yeah.
Or if there's not an exit there, they try and make their own one. So
Okay.
they rotate, score around the inside of the diff housing, and the amount of force that sometimes they can come out with is mad. Like we've seen them sort of bend and break the differential housings, which are solid bits of metal.
Yeah, so obviously you've got bits flying around which you don't want, and then it's acting like sandpaper inside, and yeah. So
Exactly. What should be quite an easy fix becomes very expensive, which is not what anyone wants.
No, definitely not. So based on that then, what would be the warning signs that somebody might need to have their diff rebuilt, or how can we check them?
In terms of driving, an easy warning sign is you're getting wheel spin. If you've got an LSD in there and you're getting wheel spin, it's usually a fairly indicative sign that your LSD is not working.
Yeah.
So if that happens to you, certainly worth checking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as we've talked about before, clunking and banging is normal for these diffs when you've got sintered plates in there.
Yeah.
With carbon ones, they should be a bit quieter, but if they then start becoming more noisy and clunking and banging, like when they weren't before, that is also a pretty sort of easy sign.
Yeah, that's definitely what happened to mine, and I don't know if I've got any footage somewhere. I might see if I have, but the best way that I could describe it was, yes, it was slightly noisy because I think all diffs are, or from my experience, like all of them are, but it got worse, and it literally happened very quickly. So possibly, like as we've seen earlier, that mine are cracked, aren't they? And maybe that's when, maybe one of those, or maybe it's when both of those happened. I don't know, but something definitely changed, and it kind of felt like someone was kind of hitting the underneath of the car. That's the best way that I can kind of describe it, but it was definitely a lot worse noise than what it was before, like, because they all have a little bit of noise.
Yeah, no, they all do. It's hard to give a definitive. Oh yeah, this noise is definitely because this is cracking, or this noise is definitely because the carbon's worn off. It's because a carbon wearing off would have been a slow process. It wouldn't have been a sudden thing, but your Belgium's cracking would have been.
Yeah.
So that may well have been where the noise started.
Yeah.
More than likely, I would say. But it's hard to say exactly when. It's.
But is there a way? I think I've read online about using a torque wrench on one of your wheel nuts.
Yes. So apart from driving the car and listening for it, you can preload test the diffs, and it's useful not just to work out if your diffs failed, but also if you've got a good usable diff in there.
Yeah.
It's very helpful to try and check preloads, so you know where your car is, and you might have a diff setting that you quite like, but it seems to work well for you.
Yeah.
So if you're very keen and you don't mind checking often, then it's quite a nice bit of data to have.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at it from the perspective is my diff worn, then there is an easy way to check. So you get your car in your garage or on the ground, wherever you want to do your test. You chock up one wheel, put a couple of wooden blocks either side of it.
Yep.
Keep the car in neutral, then jack up the other side so it's slightly off the ground. Get a torque wrench on your hub nut.
Yep.
And just turn it over. Doesn't matter what direction. Do it in both. Why not? But yeah, doesn't matter what direction, and see what the torque to turn is.
Okay.
And that is the preload across the entire axle.
Yeah.
There is a little bit. It will be a little bit inflated because you've got a little bit of brake drag there, a bit of sort of drag from the knuckles and so on in your drive shafts, and a bit of friction on the seal. But it's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
What we tend to say to people is if it's below, this is not just for carbon plated diffs, this is for all Titan diffs.
Yeah.
If it's below 20, it probably needs to get looked at.
Okay.
They shouldn't really be running that low. And not just for longevity purposes, but for performance as well.
Mm-hmm.
If it's below 10, it is very urgently like you must get this done.
Yeah.
If it's a 0, well, something's already broken at that point.
Definitely
or is not far away.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it's low, if it's at 0, definitely worth getting it checked.
Yeah.
And getting it looked at, especially if it's one of the years that's likely to have carbon plates in it, because that will almost certainly be the problem.
Yeah.
If you've already got sintered plates and you're just looking for a health check, then I generally say to people, when it gets below 30, keep a closer eye on it, and think about getting it rebuilt maybe next winter season, or whenever it's convenient.
Yeah.
But it's not ultra urgent.
Yeah.
But we find sort of most caterhams are happiest anywhere between sort of 35 to 45, 50.
Okay.
That's where they seem to be at their happiest and performing best.
Yeah.
Does depend on the driver. Some drivers like a more aggressive set diff. Some drivers do like a a bit more of a softer diff. It does vary, but that's what we find most people seem to be happy.
Okay.
So,
And those kind of torque settings, they'd be the same for a Tracsport as well as a Titan diff, or is that slightly
no,
different?
so they're a bit different. They're generally set lower.
Okay.
I think Tracsports from memory come out at around about 25 foot-pound. So if you've got a Tracsport, that is what I believe is the standard sort of preload setting on them.
Okay.
So yeah, you can just sort of disregard my previous advice for a Tracsport. But
Yeah.
in the same, the only thing that sort of still applies here is if that does go down to 0, then you will need to get that looked at as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because if it's down at 0, it will just be being used as an open diff, basically, won't it? It won't be doing.
Yeah, it's being used as an open diff. If it's down to 0 on any LSD, it doesn't necessarily mean it's being used as an open diff all the time, but it does mean it's a lot harder to lock generally.
Yeah.
Because especially when you lift the wheel, you know, you have to start to lock it while both wheels are on the ground with grip. Because otherwise, if the wheel's in the air, there's no initial load there to essentially help it lock.
Okay.
So it just funnels off the power like an open diff would.
Right.
It's not a very nice way to drive. You certainly wouldn't want it on a caterham.
No, definitely. Oh, this is a good one. So, how often should you change the oil in your diff?
That is difficult. I mean, if it's an open diff, according to BMW, these diffs are filled for life.
Right.
So if you listen to them, never. But even if it's an open diff, I would say, change every 5 years or so.
Okay.
That would be fine. With an LSD, probably a little bit more. I generally say to people, if you're using it on track and you're competitively racing with it, do it every season. Or if you've got to do anything at the back end, maybe every half a season, if you really want to be on it. If you're just using it for track days and you drive it on the road and so on, every couple of years will be fine.
Okay.
There's it kind of depends on what suits your own maintenance schedule. If you're one of these people that likes to go around and change all the oils every year, absolutely fine.
Yeah.
There's no need to do it then. But I'd say every sort of 2 years would be fine. 2 to 5 years if you're not doing much track work, if you're just using it on the road.
Yeah. And the best way to drain it is to kind of suck it out, isn't there? Because there's not actually a drain kind of plug, is there? There's only kind of like a fill one, isn't there?
No, there's not a standard drain plug. There's only a fill plug.
Yeah.
So most people get some sort of suction device, suck the oil out, and put new stuff back in with it in situ. Some people find that a bit too fiddly and just remove the diffs if they can do it quickly. But for the vast majority of people, just using a sucker is the best way.
Yeah. But to be honest, I was quite surprised how easy it was to remove the diff anyway, and also for a caterham because it's also quite good to clean underneath depending on how you kind of use the car as well. So it's actually quite handy at being out of the way to do a bit of cleaning anyway. So maybe that could be part of my kind of yearly routine of take it out and just check the oil that way, or potentially change it every year, possibly.
Yeah, I mean it all depends on what you've got available. I mean if you're mechanically handy and you don't mind removing it, then great.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if you're not, getting a sucker in there is something most people, regardless of ability, should do. And you can do that lying on the floor.
Yeah.
I mean, it might get a bit of oil in your face, but it's part of owning a caterham.
Yeah, definitely. And also, and thank you for rebuilding my LSD today. But how long do you think that will last me for? Obviously, it depends on use, and I'll be using it mainly for road driving and, I don't know, the odd track day, maybe 3-4 a year, something like that.
Yeah, it does depend on use. Like, it also depends on the amount of power your car's got as well.
Yeah.
Like a higher powered car, you're going to put more stress on the Bellevue washers because they compress a bit more.
Yeah.
Which means they are the main wearing component in these. They're designed to wear.
And mine they were quite worn, weren't they?
Yours were a bit worn, but for other reasons. But yeah, so it does depend. It's very much how long is a piece of string.
Yeah.
But in general, I say if you're, I mean, at the moment we're finding 2 to 5 years again is how long they sort of need to be. After 2 to 5 years, they should be checked and sort of potentially reset.
Yeah.
But as we know, we can check them on the car.
Yeah.
So that becomes less of a problem. So in terms of how long will yours last, it's hard to say. But with your usage, I'd be very surprised if I saw you here in under 4 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And you may well get longer. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
But I never want to say to people, oh yeah, it'd be fine. It would last for 8 years, no issue at all. Because if they come back in 3 years, oh, you said it would last for 8, and you know,
Yeah.
I'd much rather be if it lasts longer, then great. But I'd much rather be a bit conservative in my guessing.
Yeah, definitely. And like I say, you can check them
Yeah.
while they're on the car as well, or at least get an idea.
Yeah.
And if people aren't sure, I'm sure they could email you, and I'll put your email address and your website in the description below as well. So if you do have any questions, hopefully that's okay, and I'm sure you can point them in the right direction. And so another question: what ramp angles would you use? And also, which might lead on to this one. What are the kind of different diff options that you can have in a Caterham, and what would be your preferred one? That's probably that's quite a long question.
No, that's right. We'll start with the ramps. I mean, I can go into as much detail as you want. I can give you a sort of history of why the ramps that the Titan uses are in there, which, you know, I'm sure you can edit out, but, you know, depending on how bored you get. No, so the ramps in the Titan are a 3090.
Yeah.
That is what's sort of stock for Caterhams. You know, the Titan's a factory fitted diff. These were sort of decided on. God, I can't remember, back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I believe. When and they basically went through a development process to work out what was the right ramps.
Yeah.
They did a lot of testing, a lot of different LSDs. And these ramps in particular were found to be the most the best for performance.
Okay.
And I mean that essentially predated, because before the Titan existed, everyone was using ZF as LSDs and the original Ford Sierras.
Yeah.
And obviously the Ford Sierra diffs got put into the Caterhams before your style of BMW diff.
Yeah.
And originally they ran on 45 ramps. And you know, they were fine, but people found they didn't have the drive to get them out of the corners. They were, you know, they eliminated a bit of wheel spin, which is great, but they didn't have the effect to try and negate some of the understeer Caterham has by sort of locking aggressively and getting them out the corners and a bit more sideways.
Right. So
what happened is my Phil, who's obviously runs Road and Race, his brother was racing back then, and as part of the series they decided, you know what, we've got some 30-degree ramps, so they put 30/30s in his car,
right,
and suddenly he was a lot quicker than everyone else.
Okay.
And a few of the other competitors back in the day were going, what's going on here? So can you do this to my car? And you know, at the time he was accused of running traction control, and he got called up for scrutineering quite a lot.
Yep.
And they kept trying to find sensors and traction control devices on his car, and they were like, well, why is yours so much faster out the corner? He goes, well, I've got different ramps. It's, you know, and as Phil explained, this is what we do. You know, and then it got around the paddock, and you know, quite a few people approached him and said, oh, can you do the same thing? Can you do the same conversion? So back then, for premium, like for optimum racing use, they switched from 45/45s to 30/30s.
Right.
The 30/30s were great, they got you out of the corners, but they had the disadvantage of it also started to lock the wheels and get a bit of understeer going in.
Right.
So whilst it was better than what we had before, it still wasn't ideal. So when it came to developing another LSD, they looked at it and went, well, we want it to try and turn into the corners as close to an open diff as possible. We don't want any understeer, or as little understeer as possible, going into a corner.
Right.
So that's what they decided, let's try a 30/90. And that was one of the ramp options. And the 90 essentially means it doesn't load any more than the static load across your diff.
Okay.
So whatever it is we've set yours at, it will not load any more than that. So that is why the Titans were developed with a 30/90.
Right.
Which, again, back when they tested it amongst 30/30s, 45/45, and various other ramp options, and different styles of differential as well.
Yep.
So it wasn't just plated diffs they were testing, they tested like helical style ones, and viscous ones, and they had a full sort of spectrum of tests, because at the end of the day they wanted the best for the cars at that time, and if they were going to do the development and get a new diff,
yep,
they wanted, you know, whatever was the best. Anyway, they landed on the 30/90 with the Titans, and that was the most optimum, the best one that they could get.
Yep.
And it just seems to work very, very well.
Okay.
So that's the ramp that's in yours, because that same 3090 is carried through from the Titan designed for the Ford Sierra to the Titan for the BMW.
Okay.
And that is in my opinion the optimum for these. Some people might prefer different ramps, and some of that will come down to sort of driver preference potentially, some slight setup changes in their cars, but we've seen cars running 400 horsepower winning championships with 3090s.
Yeah.
We've seen 120 horsepower sort of sprint and hill climb cars again with 3090s. It seems to work very well for the Caterham chassis, and at the end of the day it was designed for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of R&D went into it.
Okay.
Back then.
So with the differences of diffs that you can have for the Caterhams then, so I know I've got a Titan, I know Tracsports are very popular. So what are the other options that you can have?
There is a few for the BMW diffs. So there is Titan, as we all know, which is the factory fit. There's Tracsport, which is a very popular diff, especially to sort of, it does keep them a fair bit quieter than the Titans.
Okay.
Also, they use molybdenum plates, which are inherently a lot smoother. They're very similar to the ZF, or the same material the ZF ones used, which were designed for road cars. So they are smooth, they are nice, and they are grippy. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
So that is why if noise is a major concern, the Tracsport is actually a very good diff to go for.
Okay.
You've then got Drexler, which uses molybdenum plates like the Tracsport, and you've seen those, I believe.
Yeah. It looked, and you showed me that diff inside as well, which I'll hopefully give a pan of now.
Yeah.
And you can tell just by looking at that diff as well, it just looks like it's quality as well. Just the parts of it just look, I don't know what, just a little bit better made possibly than the Titan, or a slightly different materials possibly, but you can tell, I don't know, they're just slightly different, but they look like a quality item.
I mean, they build GT car diffs. They are, I mean, we find that they're our favourite brand, I think, to deal with generally.
Okay.
They're not cheap, but you pay for like quality engineering. They've got, as I said, they've got molybdenum plates which are very smooth to engage. They're quite nice. You don't get as much of the clunking and banging you do with a Titan.
Yep.
Which are really good. But the other advantage for us is we've got complete choice over ramp angles, so we can put whatever ramp angles we want in them.
Yep.
So for instance, for a Caterham, put like a 3090 or something very, very close to that.
Okay.
Because we know that works best. But if we're using it for other cars, so we fit these things like BMW M3s and all sorts of other stuff. We've got flexibility and ramp angle options that we can go, you know what, that's what we want. And if they don't do it, they'll just make it for us, which is even better.
Okay, that sounds very good. Good relationship there.
Yeah, well, they want the best out there in their cars.
Yeah.
They're a top tier manufacturer that they're found in touring cars and GT cars and others. So they are about as premium as they come when it comes to diffs.
So I know you don't own a Caterham, but if you owned a Caterham, would you put that in as your diff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I definitely would. It would, at the end of the day, it all comes down to budget. If everyone's got an unlimited budget, they'll put the best components in their cars no matter what, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Oh no, I totally understand that. And to be honest, that's normally my problem is the budget.
Yeah.
So and possibly why the Titan's gone back in. It's kind of a tried and tested things in lots of Caterhams, and then it sounds like Tracsport's good for if you want a quieter diff, and obviously costs a little bit more than a Titan, and then the Drexler.
Yeah,
Keep saying that name wrong, said that name wrong way too many times today. And that's a bit more money again, but then that's possibly the better one.
That is for if you want a nice, in my opinion, if you want a nice compromise between road use, you want it to be quieter for road use, but you also want the best for track use.
Yeah,
that's the way to go. In my opinion, I mean, I've rated quite highly in terms of longevity.
Yep.
Like we see them, albeit slightly different diffs, we see them in GT cars. They're running for years and endurance races, and we look at them and go, oh, fine, crack on. Like it's nothing to worry about here. They are extremely durable.
Yep.
And it's why, as I mentioned to you, it's why I prefer sending them out to America, Australia, where across the world, because the uptick you pay in price initially will save you on rebuild costs and maintenance in the long term.
Yeah.
Whilst still getting the best performance you can. And there is one other diff I didn't really touch on, which is a wave track, which is also another option for these.
Yeah.
Which is like a helical style, which is what most people think of as a quaif diff. They're all from the same sort of family, the same sort of general design. Wave track is another option for the caterhams for your type of diff.
Yeah.
We fitted a few of these. They're relatively new to caterhams, but they've been going for years in other cars.
Yeah.
They're probably the quietest diff you can get.
Okay.
They torque bias rather than lock like a plated diff. But the one advantage they do have over other torque biasing diffs and other helical style diffs is if you end up spinning a wheel by lifting it, they've got a little locking device which temporarily locks the diff.
Okay.
As it detects essentially too much wheel spin. Temporarily locks the diff, allows power to still be put to the wheel on the ground.
Yep.
And then when the other wheel eventually regains grip, it acts like a normal helical diff again. So you get the benefits of the smoothness and the ability for both wheels to turn independently at all times with a slight locking action and the torque biasing effect. And we found those in general, not just for caterhams, but for a lot of cars, especially road-based ones, they do work pretty nicely.
Okay.
So that's what I'd go for. If noise was a massive concern and that was your biggest worry, but you still want an LSD.
Yeah.
There's LSDs for all sorts of budgets and requirements.
Yeah, it sounds like it's one of those not very easy answers. It depends on what you're going to be using your car for, like say budget as well, and possibly noise levels. So there's definitely not a right or wrong answer with that one. So yeah, sorry, a hard question for you there.
It is.
But thank you for your answer. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me come down today and for rebuilding my diff as well. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for answering my questions as well. And
no problem at all.
Yeah,
I hope this has been helpful to a lot of owners.
Definitely, and if you've got any questions, please just have a look in the description below, and I'll leave Ollie's email address there. Hopefully that'll be okay if anyone's got any questions, especially if you've got any questions about your own diff or what diff that you might want to buy, because it sounds like from talking to a lot of owners, some owners aren't sure if their diff needs rebuilding anyway, and it sounds like there's probably quite a few diffs out there that do need rebuilding, and you're definitely the correct place to go to. So thank you very much for having me down today and for rebuilding my diff, and yeah, thank you very much for letting me ask these questions to you.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for coming down. It's been great to meet you, and
yeah, brilliant. No, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you. If you have made it to the end, well, I salute you. Going to Road and Race was really interesting, and I learnt so much on the day. I know they see this stuff all the time, but I found it really interesting. I know how an LSD feels in a car on the road, but I didn't really understand how they worked until coming here. I would like to say another big thank you to Ollie for spending the time with me, and also to agreeing to be on camera to answer my questions. Let me know in the comment section below if you would like me to interview or ask questions to another catering related company or person. Have you got any ideas? Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It makes a big difference to a small channel like mine. And don't forget, every stone chip tells a story, and I'll see you in the next one.
As you fade away.